Good morning, everyone. I'm Elliot Gerson of the Aspen Institute. I'm delighted to see all of you here bright and early this morning. I hope you had a very good time last night. And I am thrilled, having been involved with this program since inception, to bring it to Chicago and see all the energy that we have seen around this inaugural event that we hope very much to continue. We've actually had a couple of different titles, for those of you who chose this session more than a day or two ago. And you can choose your metaphor and mix them in any way you want, but we all know why these are important questions, whether it's headwinds or uncharted waters, navigating one way or another the political and cultural climate we find ourselves in. All of us, or many of us at least, involved in nonprofit institutions, and in this case also philanthropies, that are devoted to doing whatever is possible to assure the most, that our land, our air, our water, our ecosystem is as vibrant and secure as possible. And obviously, without going into too many or any details, there have been challenges as this work continues, as it's more important than ever. And we're here to discuss how we are meeting those challenges, particularly with a Midwestern focus, appropriately enough given where we are, and also given the fact that some of our participants, many of you in this audience, are actually especially skilled and now experienced, maybe more than you'd like to be, in navigating these waters, in dealing with whether it's publics or governments, local, state governments that might not be, at least in some contexts or using some vocabularies, as sympathetic to these issues as others might like. I could just get out of the way because, not surprisingly, we have four friends here together who know each other quite well from their common work, and I could just move off to the side and let them talk, and I'll try to do that as much as possible. What I'm going to start, though, is just to ask each person briefly to introduce herself or himself, the foundation or philanthropy they're associated with, and their particular focuses, and then we'll have some conversation, and I hope very much, and will leave time to all of you at the end. And also a reminder for those of you, although we have a pretty full room, for those who are not here today, that these sessions end up having far more circulation afterward, and they'll probably be available online within about 3 days, so please tell your friends. So why don't we start down at the end with just quick introductions.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ryan Strode. I'm the Director for Environment at Crown Family Philanthropies, and our funding focuses equally on climate change and the Great Lakes.
That was really quick, Ryan.
I have your elevator speech now.
Yeah, right. I'm Deborah Philbrook. I'm a senior program officer with the MacArthur Foundation based here in Chicago. Aspen kindly gave me a promotion to director, which I've confirmed is not true on the website. Senior program officer.
I'll still put in a word for you.
Appreciate it,
And let me also thank you, in addition, for your generous sponsorship of this event.
Of course. So we are an international funder, an international climate funder, but regardless of the places that we are working, I do focus primarily on our U.S. portfolio. We've always had a strong interest and belief in investing in the subnational, which is why I'm excited to be on this panel, and especially because energy policy gets made and implemented inside of state houses and inside of the communities that exist inside of states, and so really delighted to be joining you all today.
Good morning, everybody. I'm John Mitterholzer, and I'm the director of the George Gund Foundation's Climate and Environmental Justice Program. We're a family foundation located in Cleveland, Ohio, and we only fund work in the state of Ohio.
Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Stephanie Goodrod Lawson. I'm the executive director of the McKinney Family Foundation in Indiana. We are the anchor climate and democracy funder for the state of Indiana. If you permit me, I just have to say something really quick. It is so exciting to be on the stage with these friends. I have to tell you that these two gentlemen have had my back for a decade. Anytime I have a question or I have a need, these are my first two people to call. John has made the drive, the 5-hour drive from Cleveland to Indianapolis a couple of times to speak to my board about potential new grantees. So if you need some help getting a grantee across the finish line that may be a little controversial, he's your guy. And Ryan and I actually started a nonprofit together, and we chair it together to this day. So we do a lot. And then Deb is so incredible with her amazing content expertise and her generosity. I will frequently call her, text her, and say, can you unpack this policy for me? Can you explain what this EO means for us? And she always is so kind and so supportive. So I just had to say this really quickly, that these are amazing people that I get to work with.
Well, it's been my privilege to discover that, and I'm jealous that all of you know each other very well. I also recognize your board chair is in the front row, and we're very delighted to have her here and her commitment as well. Let me start perhaps with you, Ryan, to give us a bit of an overview of our topic, and also perhaps the nature of the actual challenge, whether it's emissions or otherwise, in this region, and how you are looking at these challenges.
Absolutely. Well, there's been a lot of talk at this conference already that we can't solve climate globally without leadership from the United States. I think everyone on this stage would argue you cannot solve climate in the United States without the Midwest. Any route towards meeting our emissions goals goes through the Midwest. We are responsible for 25% of the carbon emissions in the United States. That number has not changed, despite the fact that we've seen a rapid adoption of renewable energy in the Midwest. 40% of our clean energy across the 12-state Midwest region comes from renewable energy, and yet our emissions is either flat or increasing. And that is due to the fact that we are an industrial hub. It is due to the fact that we are a transportation hub. We have some of the worst air quality in the nation here in Chicago. We don't have a single coal plant in the boundaries of the city of Chicago. That is because we are a transportation hub. That is rail, that is heavy-duty trucking, automobiles. So we have a very complex emissions problem in the Midwest, and there's agricultural emissions, which have been increasing even as we've been grappling with power sector emissions. And so until we solve for the Midwest, there is no pathway to meeting our goals. And that's why it's exciting that you have a through line here. You've got global, regional, and then state-based funders. I think the Ohio and Indiana funders are going to do paper, scissors, rock to see whose fault our emissions problem is between Indiana and Ohio.
It's Ohio.
That's a competition nobody wants to win. But so it is a very real challenge in the Midwest. And at the same time, I would argue that we have, in many ways, the most to lose. The Midwest is often cited as the nation's climate refuge. And climate change is here in the Midwest. I mean, everybody's feeling it, but we've seen a 40% increase in extreme rainfall already in the Midwest. In my state of Indiana, we just set the record for the most tornadoes in one spring. It felt like every week. We've seen extreme heat events here in the city of Chicago double already, and the region has already borne $319 billion of climate-related damages. And the number of those events have doubled in the last 5 years. And so, and that is one of the biggest gaps, frankly. Like, we have not begun a conversation as a region about what resilience and adaptation looks like. And so we have to begin to grapple with that. And despite the fact that the Midwest is the biggest emitter in the United States, we only receive 12% of the climate philanthropy. So 25% of the problem, 12% of the philanthropy, even to this day, even despite the fact that we have so many critically important states, swing states, politically important states, which you'll hear Deb talk more about. And then the last thing I'd say is that even the philanthropy within the Midwest, and this is one of the biggest issues that we're grappling with, always goes to the same places. You know, I can say that as a funder who's primarily focused on Chicago and Illinois, and that's one of the places where the funding tends to go. But we've ignored, there are 12 states in the Midwest region. The vast majority of the funding goes to 3 of them. And what happens when you ignore the red states, the purple states, the states that we give up on, is they fester and they become these laboratories of bad policy. And I think you'll hear more about that from these 2 states. But we export all the worst ideas, all the things that we now see the federal administration doing comes from these states. And so we have a very substantial gap into the hardest to reach places. And that's one of the things we want to talk about today in terms of place-based philanthropy, is we cannot give up on those hard to reach places, whether they're rural, whether they're communities of color, whether they're red states, because that's a big part of why we're in the situation we're in now.
Thank you, Ryan. And also just consistent with what you just said, obviously, not only is much of the challenge coming from emissions and other developments here, but philanthropists and others to solve the problem cannot just come from the coasts. And this is enormously important. A little historical footnote, actually, a member of the Crown family led to the idea of this event. Steve Crown phoned me about 5 years ago and suggested that we do something like this. So delighted to have that. Stephanie, I think I've heard somewhere that the McKinney Foundation finds a way when there is no way, or something like that. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about your focus, but maybe first add a little. You sent me some wonderful slides as well about the Midwestern contribution both to the challenge and to the solution. But please, just as we just heard, from your own state and local perspective.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. We are, like Ohio, responsible for the vast majority of emissions with GHGs, and we're really trying to find different ways to break down barriers. That's really what we see our role as at McKinney Family Foundation, to barrier bust and create opportunities for our grantees to succeed. And so, we've really focused on the clean energy sector, industrial decarbonization. We're moving into ag, but democracy is a really important part of that piece. Equal access to the ballot. Indiana is often listed by the Brennan Center for Justice as the least, or one of the least democratic states in the country, because we have so many things that are barriers to us, including being the most gerrymandered state. So we really find that we want to focus on 3 different areas to tear down those barriers and focus on. So one of which is law and policy gaps that protect fossil fuels and prevent the deployment of clean energy. So we really are working on defense. As Ryan mentioned, a lot of the really negative policies, whether it's an environmental policy or, stopping voters, the post-voter ID laws were in Indiana. A lot of those things, ALEC uses us as a petri dish for policy. It is a lot cheaper to come to my state and to Ohio and to fight there than before it gets to the expensive places where then the media picks it up in Texas and Florida. The ROI is in Indiana and Ohio. We also are really big into building coalitions, and because we're pragmatic, we're known as a progressive foundation, of course, and we are just as dedicated to racial equity and environmental justice as any of our partners on the coast, but we have to use different language. We live in a supermajority Republican red state. They have all the power in the Senate, in the House, the governor's office, and every other state office. So we have to find ways to work together. So we fund quite a lot of conservative groups. We fund groups across the aisle, and it's really important. And those relationships have forged over 10 years between the big greens, between the business groups, between the conservatives. It's working. And we are really finding opportunities. And so when we are working on policy, we don't just work at the state house, we are working at the municipal level and the county level. And those are really important too. And finding opportunities, I can tell you a story really quickly that sticks in my mind. We had a mayor in a deep red part of our state, a Republican mayor, who was a climate denier, and he was anti-clean energy. After 3 years of a program, he flipped completely 180 and became a climate leader and a climate champion in our state. You want to know how we did it?
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you a question. What is the most persuasive group of people on the planet? Teenagers. They will wear you down. Parents and grandparents, you know what I mean. So we said, let's deploy that tenacity for good. So what we do is we fund McKinney Climate Fellows. We embed them in mayor's offices around the state, and they build relationships with these leaders, and they change their minds. We have over 40 cities and towns that have done this, and that's where our climate action is working. So there's a lot to be learned there. I would also say workforce development. We are building the next leaders of the future with that program, but we are also really focused on how do we support the mom and pop companies, right? We've been talking a lot about this in the last day and a half, where we're trying to support really opportunities for energy resilience and clean energy jobs. We are now the 12th largest state in the country when it comes to clean energy jobs, which is way above our weight in per capita. And we're really working on finding opportunities to build that out. And then third, we are trying to barrier bust resource scarcity. As Ryan said, we're doing this with two hands tied behind our back. We need to find ways to be collaborative and creative. So we're really finding a lot of different opportunities to tear down those walls between those of us that are deploying capital through grants, but also in the investor community. So we are deploying all of our resources in impact investing, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But there's a lot of different opportunities, and we've launched a green bank to do that in Indiana. It's called Indiana Energy Independence Fund, and we've got about $40 million in the pipeline moving right now, and we're excited to talk to anybody that wants to learn more about it. So thank you.
Thank you, and we'll come back to some of those ideas. John, your friend and neighbor in this region with very similar challenges, please let us, and tell us what similar things you are doing and how you're facing this challenge. And also tell us a little bit about what gives you hope despite those challenges.
Sure. So let me just start with it's absolutely 100% Ohio's fault. So we start there. We are the 5th largest emitter in the United States, but more importantly, if we were our own country, we would be the 26th largest emitter in the world. So I can't do climate work in Ohio and tell you anything other than, yeah, it starts with us. So a little bit of political context. We have a Republican trifecta, so Republican governor, Senate, and House. We have the largest supermajorities in the history of Ohio currently. So those are the politics that play out when we're working on climate. So when the Paris Climate Accord passed, my board said to me, well, what do we do to keep Ohio on a path to Paris? And I was like, that's a great way to think about our strategy. So I just took it. So that's really what we focus on, right? Is what is Ohio's role globally, because we are such a large emitter, and how do we keep our country towards those goals that the rest of the world has decided? And we do that really focused solely on climate mitigation that is centered on equity and justice. There are lots of ways to do this work, but we believe strongly that if we take our eye off equity and justice, we won't do it correctly, and that really drives the work. We focus on lots of different things because, as all of you know, you're experts in this field. There are lots of things we have to do in order to address climate. We focus heavily on policy. We are a foundation that has worked on policy for many decades, and so we work on policy and advocacy. We fund a lot of work at the state level, and in March, we actually passed an energy bill in the state of Ohio. I can't believe I can say this out loud, that doesn't stink. It's actually a really good energy bill. We also, I won't say steal, we learn from our colleagues. So I saw what Indiana was doing on cities, and I thought, we need to do more on cities. And so in 2019, we launched a new program called Power Clean Future Ohio. It's now become its own nonprofit. PCFO works with cities, townships, villages across the state on climate action and really helping those communities address climate change. We didn't know if this would be successful or not, but it has been wildly successful. What we have learned is that mayors actually have to get stuff done. Like, unlike our legislature, they really are accountable and they have to focus on issues. And when you have far more storm events happening in your community and you've got to deal with rainwater runoff and all those other things, you have to figure out how to solve it. And so we have learned that mayors are very interested in thinking about how they can address climate change. In order to join the Power Clean Future Ohio network, you have to commit to passing legislation that says that you're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 30% by 2030. We have 51 communities in Ohio that have made that commitment. That represents 49% of the population of the state of Ohio living in a community that is committed to climate action, almost 6 million people. Like, that is huge. And those mayors are Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian. It is all over the place on the different kinds of communities that have joined PCFO. So I'm really proud of that work, and we are doing a lot on greenhouse gas reduction. So thank you, Stephanie, for giving me the idea, because that really came from Indiana. Like McKinney, we are also really interested in green finance. We're really worried that, unfortunately, like the rest of capital in this country. It does not move to low-income communities of color. It doesn't support the kinds of projects that we need to be supporting. And so we decided that we were going to have to go our own and create our own green bank to try to move clean energy capital to the places we care most about in Cleveland. And so we created the Go Green Energy Fund also in 2019. I guess it was just a big year. And that is really, much like Indiana, the goal is to really move that capital to places that it just isn't getting to at the moment. And then finally, we helped our grantees in 2023 apply for those big, huge grants in the Inflation Reduction Act, and somehow, miraculously, we received $285 million to do wildly big things, including a Solar for All grant that encompasses 8 states, 18 cities, including Indianapolis and Fort Wayne, to provide free solar to low-income folks all across those cities and regions. And then we got a climate pollution reduction grant that will deploy 63 megawatts of solar across 2 counties. It will close a coal-fired power plant in a black neighborhood and replace that with 30 megawatts of solar and 10 megawatts of battery. It's awesome. My grantees are amazing. So our role in that was really trying to figure out how the heck to apply for these really hard federal grants and what was the expertise that was needed, all of that. But then, now it's really how do we deploy this? And, sadly, with the solar tax credits, how do we deploy much faster than we thought we had to? So there's a lot of great stuff happening in Ohio. It is challenging, and I would just say, much like Stephanie, the biggest challenge in Ohio, unfortunately, we have a lot of philanthropy in the state of Ohio. There are only 2 funders that fund climate work. It is the George Gunn Foundation and the Cleveland Foundation. And my colleague Stephen would be here if he didn't have a brand new baby. But really, when we are in the room, we are the only 2 funders in the state of Ohio. There are only 2 people in Ohio from the funding community that work on climate every day. So, thanks.
Thank you. And let's hope there will be more to follow. Deborah, we'd love to hear, as someone locally rooted, a foundation locally rooted, but national, indeed quite global in scope, share your perspectives both about the importance of this local, regional, multi-local regional focus, and how you see that in the overall picture, and if it affects your own philanthropy.
First, I'll say that you made a comment earlier that we don't need coastal funding, and I would just like to say if there's any coastal funders here, we'll take all the money we can get in the Midwest.
That won't be enough.
Correct. I mean, it's fascinating, really. I mean, I feel like we are often in this place where we are oscillating and jumping between federal ambition and then what your kids like PTA is saying, and then what might be the headline at the COP or the G20, and then which next door governor is saying something wild, right? So I think in our daily lives we jump back and forth between these global perspectives and then the way that it impacts us in our day-to-day lives, and it's just that way in the funding community as well. I mean, what I hope we don't see right now is a huge exodus from the United States. There are certainly some global funders who are choosing to reallocate some of their funds to other places that rightfully deserve more funding, right? Like there's a lot of opportunity in other parts of the globe, and there's other parts of the globe that have been dealing with challenges that we are now dealing with in the United States for a very long time, and we have a lot to learn from them, just like we have a lot to learn from our colleagues in states that work in hard place. Hard is such like a bad word. It's just like, interesting places. And that I feel like is really my job here on this panel, is to plus one everything that you two say, and to make sure that folks know that digging deep into a state doesn't mean that you're not ambitious. So I think that one of the things that funders will often consider is, well, what's the scale that we can hit, right? Like climate funders in particular are obsessed with scale. But really, anybody who's like ever built Legos, like the scale is impressive, but it happens one bit at a time. And one of the things that I've learned is that the work that we are doing either with the Global Methane Hub, for example, or any of our other national efforts, is that they're all building building blocks of smaller things, and that doesn't mean that they have small impact. That just means that the person that you are talking to has a narrower set of expertise. And sometimes you really, really need that specific set of expertise in order to unlock whatever barrier is standing in your way. When it comes to the Midwest, one of the things that I would say is working in the Midwest is a fantastic one because we all genuinely like each other, as you can tell. But also because it is such a politically diverse place. You know, you can have incredible policies passed here in Illinois. You can have incredible policies passed in Minnesota. I see our colleague from McKnight in the background. And you can have really local successes in some of the states that other people would tend to be less interested in investing in. And so I think it all leads up, and I don't have to tell this room this, but like every 0.1 degree matters. And that's how you get to like 2 degrees. It's like 0.1 degree at a time. And so investing in these local strategies. And I will just, because I have a report that was just launched yesterday, so I'm gonna launch it here. So ourselves, the Marin Community Foundation and Equation Campaign, whose folks are in the front row if you want to chat with them afterwards, commissioned this report from Redstone called Changing the Game. And it was really our attempt to put some numbers and some, let's be honest, legitimacy behind community-based strategies. And one of the things that it found is that local philanthropic investment of less than $1 can get you a metric ton reduction every year until 2030. So, you know, these are big numbers that add up, mostly because the people who are based in place know how to spend their money really efficiently, right? Like how many people are funders in the room? Can I see raise hands? Okay, now raise your hand if you've tried to get money from one of the 4 people on the stage. Okay, cool. You know, when you're crafting these strategies, you often find yourselves calling your colleagues who are working as close to the ground as possible to truth check some of the things that we're hearing. Are things that are being pitched to us to say, you know, what is possible? And so it really is working, I think, across the like size, scale of type of philanthropy of those who are working on global scales, who can fill in the dollars for, I think a good example of this is we were able to do a community participatory grant fund for the Ohio River Valley. And at the time, one funder could only fund in Ohio. MacArthur didn't care, right? MacArthur wanted the fund to work. Another folks that could only fund in West Virginia or Pennsylvania, right? And so it's about piecing the mortar together so that the low carbon concrete bricks really fit well together, and that there's no seepage.
Thank you. Yeah, Ryan,
I
please.
just wanted to add, build on a point Deborah made at the beginning about the fear that global philanthropy will exit the United States. I wanted to add one other number. There's the fear that funding will exit the U.S. or the Midwest. There's also, we're seeing funding exit critical areas as well. $300 million of annual grant making to climate and environmental justice has dried up in the last year. Those are programs that have closed and foundations that have moved on to other things.
In what area?
Climate and environmental justice, specific. So climate justice strategies specifically, $300 million of annual grant making has closed and moved on to other things. Now that's national, but a lot of that went to the Midwest. It hurts the Midwest, but it hurts the South. It hurts, you know, everywhere else. And I also want to point out that much of those decisions were made before the current administration. So that is not a result of EOs or threats of EOs. There's other things happening in climate philanthropy that has led to a funding crisis. And organizations who are essential to winning the IRA are closing their doors and laying off staff. And I don't mean a staff person, I mean 20, 40, 60% of their staff. And so we have a funding crisis in climate, and it is especially acute and felt in those hardest to reach places, including the states that we're talking about here.
Can you just, any of you give some examples? We've heard a little bit about green banks and you know, other examples of unlocking investment, you know, blending private and public and municipal funding. Are there any particular projects that are sort of shovel ready, if you will, that any of you would like to talk about that give you excitement and that could be replicable?
Sure. So in Cuyahoga County, which is where Cleveland, Ohio is located, our county executive, Chris Ronayne, launched a municipal utility. It's hard to call it a municipal utility because it's a county. It's the first county utility in the country, which is pretty wild and pretty crazy. And it really was because we just weren't seeing clean energy being deployed at the county level anywhere in Ohio without massive fights. And we wanted to basically say the door's open and we'll take whatever we get. They then applied for this climate pollution reduction grant, largest grant in the history of Cuyahoga County, $129 million. It is going to advance a microgrid program that the county is doing, and it's going to launch community solar for the first time in our region. And it's really what we were able to do is use the federal money to then match that with county money that was already going to go into that utility, but most importantly, use the federal money to learn. So rather than taking the risky taxpayer money and having to learn with that money, it's still taxpayer money, but it's federal money, so it gives them a little bit of cover. We're able to like figure out, okay, how do we actually build solar on landfills? How do we actually do community solar that works? The closing of coal-fired power plants is an entirely different thing I don't want to talk about yet. That's tricky. But like that was a great example of our county government stepping forward, creating an entity, getting federal money to really learn from, and then hopefully continue massive investments at the county level for clean energy for, I'm hopeful decades to come. And that's not a grantee partner, right? That's a government partner, but we were able to work with them. Really my role was helping them find the expertise they simply didn't have, right? I mean, that's like starting a utility from scratch. Actually, to be fair, I gave them the grant to ask the Attorney General if they could do this in the first place. So I will pat myself on the back a little bit. When the Attorney General said, yes, you can do this, then we had to figure out all the other pieces. But like what's really great about this is it's an entire different funding stream for clean energy that we didn't have, that we now have at our disposal.
Anyone else?
So I mentioned earlier that in 2023 we launched the Indiana Energy Independence Fund, and it's a nonprofit green bank in our state. We don't have the luxury of some of our blue state friends of having state banks. That's not going to happen. So we were really excited to do this in partnership with the city of Indianapolis, which gave us $2 million as well. And so we've had investments from philanthropy and blending that capital with private capital to really be able to create that catalytic capital and that revenue stream in order to really start to highlight opportunities at the community level. And doing these deals are really important. So as I mentioned, we've done clean energy deployment, rooftop distribution, but also working with a couple of different partners. So if you're familiar with KNIFE, it's a corporate side of things. So we are doing nonprofit loans. So nonprofits have opportunities to do that. We also do blend that with grant making money so that your food banks can get access to a low interest loan blended with a grant so that they can buy a refrigerator that significantly lowers their energy costs so they can produce more towards their mission, as an example. So we've done things like that. Then we also are working on energy resilience. So as I mentioned before, we don't actually use the words climate change very much in my state. It is a trigger word, so we don't talk about it. We don't talk about environmental justice. We talk about things in a different way. Energy affordability, jobs. What are ways that we're actually helping Hoosiers' lives on a daily basis? And so we're really trying to do two things, to organize two different groups. So one is around Midwest climate-focused asset owners and allocators, right? So that's the investing community, the philanthropy community, to really try to stabilize the clean energy products that were really dependent on the IRA. Just like Ohio, we were able to get around $200 million through some of these IRA direct grants that are now very much in question. We are stepping up. We are stepping in when our government is stepping back. And so we are really committed to this. So I invite anyone that's interested in having these kind of conversations with us. And that's not just grant makers and investors, that's businesses, innovation technologies that are interested in doing this. So the second group is really deepening impact investment activities in Indiana. So we're really trying to bring greater visibility to that deal flow, to those specific projects that we know about because we live in these communities, and really identify collaborative opportunities to invest in impact verticals. So really trying to find opportunities to break down barriers between the people like us that are often making grants but don't talk to the investment managers or the asset allocators. Because I'm an ED, I find myself living in both those worlds. And so it's a really exciting opportunity for us to be able to do those things. And when I talk about the Green Bank, it's not just about those deal flows and really stacking that capital. It's also about justice. Because when we're opportunities for low income and people who have lower credit scores, what we do is we buy down the interest rate. So those people have access to doing things that keep their homes safe. I'm a public health person. I actually don't come from the environmental space. I come from public health. So that's the lens I see the world in. And when I see that our neighbors are heating their homes with their ovens or space heaters, not only is that an emissions nightmare, that's unsafe. So we have to find different ways to be and talk about people. And when you talk about that with decision makers, they're like, we're with you. We don't even go to some of the trigger words. We talk about ways that people can understand. Also on the same side with energy resilience, how can we find ways to lower people's energy bills through weatherization? You know, when our basements flood, it's annoying. It's deadly for my neighbors because of the mold and the mildew that grows in those homes because they can't remediate. We've got to stop that water from coming in. We've got to fix those windows, fix those roofs, and all of those great built environment GHG lowering impacts, but it's really about people. And so what we've done in barrier busting is not just work with environmental funders, we're working with housing funders. We're working with workforce development funders in my state because we are all working towards the same things, and I can learn a lot from them because I haven't done workforce development until the last couple of years. So I can learn from those partners. So finding new ways to invite people into climate conversations, environmental conversations that care about clean water, care about our soil to be free from contaminants, right? We don't have to always talk about climate safe ag or climate, not everybody knows what it means. So how can we talk about it in a way that really is resonating with our Hoosier residents, but also those decision makers? And we really try to bring down the temperature and demystify a lot of this work. And it's been working really well. So I invite anyone who's interested to come and talk to me because there's a lot of really good things happening.
That's terrific and very helpful. And we'll come back just before we open it up to the audience to the particular theme of messaging and words. But I wonder if anyone else would like to just join in on innovative models or projects that you think are illustrative of what others can emulate.
Well, so MacArthur doesn't invest in like individual projects. We invest in funds, but anybody who knows MacArthur's impact investment strategy knows that we love blended finance, right? Like it's going to get the party started. And my colleague, John Belbeck, who I am, yeah, hi, John, am grateful to be kind of cross-matrixed into the climate team. What I will say is that it takes so little philanthropic grant dollars to unlock more impact investment dollars. We're talking about like low six figures here, which is a lot of money for you in your personal life, might not be as much money in your professional life. And so I would really, especially in this moment right now where we are, to John's point, Mitterholzer's point, actively trying to get as many projects started, commenced construction specifically, as we can before the end of the year. If there is an opportunity for you to use your grant capital in creative ways, like this is the time, and there are many vehicles that exist to do that, whether you're interested in individual projects, if you're interested in an individual state, if you're interested in like a bigger fund. So now is the time to be creative, and there's a lot of folks on this panel and in this room who can help you figure that out.
Yeah. Ryan?
Yeah, I'll just add on the fund point. So, as brilliant as my colleagues on this stage are, I think, the best funders are the ones who listen to the communities they're supporting. And so some of the more innovative models that have emerged from the Midwest have been participatory funds, which is a wonky way of saying essentially we put money in a fund and we let the people who actually know best make decisions about how to distribute those resources. Chicago, we founded something called the Chicago Frontline Funding Initiative. Many of the foundations in this room, including McKnight, were partners in that, and we started that with a $75,000 grant. It's raised over $10 million for environmental justice in the city of Chicago, where we have had several major landmark policy wins in the city. to try to begin to move the needle on environmental justice in the city and our horrid air quality problem. And we're about to score another big win. And so it works. It works when funders take our hands off of the decision-making process, put the power in the hands of the people who live in the neighborhoods where they are heating their homes with their stove, people who really understand what works best. And we don't hear nearly enough from those people. And so I can cite a number of examples: Chicago Frontline Funding Initiative, Midwest Environmental Justice Network, what's the name now? Ohio River Valley Fund. I didn't know if they changed their name yet or not, but Collectrify, which is a people-led fund that funds bottom-up strategies around building electrification and building decarbonization. And so I think that when you ask about innovative models, our bias at CFP has increasingly been towards funds that really delegate that sort of decision-making power to people who really knows what works best for their communities, because there are no cookie-cutter solutions. The one thing that we do know works is listening from the people with lived experience on the things that we care about, and that's true on any issue that philanthropy works on.
Thank you. Deborah, John? So let me, in the time we have, we always at any Aspen event want as to involve the audience, and so I'll turn to all of you. So be thinking of short questions for any of our panelists. But let's just return to the theme of messaging and words. I mean, we heard last night from Governor Pritzker, who talked about the challenge of using certain words. Adam Met, I'm not sure I actually agree with him when he said no one believes in climate change, so he avoids those terms altogether. But clearly, we live in a time where, you know, one needs to be strategic about messaging and sensitivity to audiences and how they're going to react, and we don't want minds to stay closed. So just love to hear from any of you of what you do. I mean, for example, we still call this conference Climate. You know, there have been many people who suggested that we change the name. And, you know, people have different opinions about these things. But what is your actual experience? And you're in different cultural and political climates, so the answers may be quite different depending on the audience. But we'd love to hear from you, your thoughts on messaging given the common goals that we all have.
John and I are laughing because this is an important moment to be asking this question. But this isn't new for John and for me. We've been living in this
hear your views.
Reality for, exactly, we've been living this reality for quite a long time. And now, unfortunately, the rest of the country is experiencing what we live on a daily basis in Indiana, Ohio. So there's a lot to be said about trusted messengers as well as messages. So euphemisms abound, but things like, you know, how do we demystify some of these things where there was an executive order that that the Indiana governor said that mirrored the federal that said environmental justice no longer allowed in the state. Well, if we just use a different term, we can still do the exact same thing. So what do we mean by environmental justice? We start to unpack that. We start to talk about things like clean water, clean air. Who are the communities that are most impacted? You know, where are those communities that are literally eating, drinking, and breathing coal ash? Because we have more coal ash pits than any other state, and they're all unlined and they're all uncapped, and they happen to all be in flood zones. So those are the types of things that people can go, oh, I start to understand this is what you're working towards. And so you start to really find people where they are and talk about things, economy. I mean, you've got to talk about workforce and jobs and economists. And in this room, I'll talk about green jobs. I don't use the word green in Indiana very much. We're talking about mom and pop companies. How do we invest in electricians and plumbers and contractors? Those are all people that are doing really important work in the clean energy movement. And of course, we track those jobs, what we consider green, but we don't often talk about it in that way. And then, you know, those trusted messengers working with Eco-Right Foundation or nonprofits that can speak across those lines. But also there's a lot of trusted messengers across the board that we have relied on to be able to have these open conversations. And really try to bring it down to a level where people can understand. And I cannot say enough about deploying youth. They are the gold star when it comes to breaking this down. And it's really important because it's not political for these kids. Whether they consider themselves to be a conservative or a liberal, they care about what their future is going to look like when it comes to climate and clean energy and conservation. So we've seen what Benji Becker's done with young people. There's just a lot of really good work happening. And we've really leaned into that. And I gave this story earlier with the McKinney Climate Fellows. Use college students. They are amazing storytellers and messengers. And then we also fund a group called Earth Charter Indiana, and they work with middle school and high school children. They were the ones who've gotten every single climate ordinance done in my state. It's been youth. They are so amazing, and they come and they testify at the State House, and there's not a dry eye. They're just incredible. So those are the types of things that we have found have worked really well, and I think other states that typically don't have to use this sort of twister game of terminology and words that we do are having to learn how to do it. So definitely come and talk to John and me because we know how to do this.
That experience is invaluable. John?
Yeah, I mean, you know, this is interesting to me because my title is literally Director of Climate and Environmental Justice. And to be frank, I'll be damned if I'm changing my title. Like, I'm not doing that. At the same time, I'm not going to use those words in a whole bunch of circles in my own state. So that is sort of what we do. Every year, we have a really great retreat with our climate environmental justice grantees. It was just last week. We had this very conversation. We literally said, is it time to put away climate? For example, we're not talking about community solar in Ohio, we're talking about community energy. That's what got a whole lot of excitement. It's the same thing, but that's what we're talking about. We're going to talk about reliability and cost until we are blue in the face, because that is where we win on energy. We are cheaper and we can be more reliable. And so that is we just decided last week that is what we are going to focus on over the course of the next few years when we talk about energy, is we are creating reliable, affordable energy for Ohioans. Worked really well in our energy bill conversations, and that is just so it's constant.
It would make for a very long title, though.
Yeah, I'm not changing my title, to be really, really clear. That said, Stephanie's absolutely right? There are ways to talk about these things, and you learn when you're in our states. You learn what triggers people. You learn how to talk about them. You learn how to bring it back home to them. And it is, again, you are absolutely right, Stephanie. The bottom line in Ohio, in a state that struggles all the time with its economy, it is jobs, it is jobs, it is jobs, and no one cares if those jobs are green, blue, or red. They just want jobs.
I'm sure our other panelists would like to jump in, but I promised that we'd go to the audience, and you'll have a chance. And I knew there'd be, we've got some mic runners, I think. And why don't we first go to this side, and a woman on the aisle. And if you could be quick, we have lots of interest here.
So transportation since 2016 has been the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions and gets relatively small amount of money from philanthropy. And so I wonder if you could sort of look at that and say, so like, what is it that philanthropy could add? Is it like demand management? Is it helping set up mobility hubs? What is it? This seems to be untouched, basically.
Who would like to take that quickly?
I fund a bunch of transportation work. So I fund sort of the EV side of transportation work, but I also fund multimodal transportation. My wife works for a transit agency, so I better fund work to get more people to ride buses and trains. I think we need it all. But I think we have to be really honest about costs. It's really hard. Electric vehicles in this country, unfortunately, are extremely expensive. And in the second poorest city in the United States, which Cleveland is, you have to figure out how to talk about this and figure out how to actually help people transition to these kinds of technologies. That really was the whole focus of our Green Bank. It was we need low-income folks to be able to transition to these technologies first, and we need them to be able to do it in a way that's cost-effective. So I think transportation, I agree with you, we need far more funders funding transportation. It is the largest sector of greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Ohio now. It is not energy, it is transportation. But we also have to really understand some of the barriers in that field that are really challenging in low-income communities of color that we've absolutely got to address.
Let's move over to this quadrant now for a question, right here in the front row.
Hi, I'm Margaret, run a nonprofit in climate education. Stephanie, thank you so much for talking about youth. I think that's incredibly powerful. They have studies that show that's true. I'm wondering how climate funders are thinking about education, because I know a lot of the funders do have education portfolios as well. Is there an opportunity for both of those programs to combine forces?
We certainly believe in it very deeply. My founder, Robert H. McKinney, said to me years ago, Stephanie, you got to fix our brain drain problem. We have incredible institutions like Notre Dame, Indiana University, Purdue University. People come, get fantastic degrees, and they leave. So how do we incentivize? So we have a couple different programs that I would love to see replicated in other places. The Fellows Program is one of them. So we pay them a very fair wage. We make sure that they have cost of their housing and their transportation paid for, and we embed them in nonprofits, municipalities, and companies. We have just graduated our 260th alumni from this program, and they stay because they're building relationships and networking while they're doing this fellowship program. So it's not only free labor that's really important, that's doing good things, they're learning on the job. And I really believe in learning on the job. We also are really investing in continuing to build the leadership for the nonprofit pipeline. So how do we make sure that there's future leaders? So we really want these nonprofit leaders to graduate without debt. So investing in fellowships for full ride education for a degree in environmental philanthropy. So we have that type of programs. We also are working with Butler School, the Lacey School of Business at Butler University to train future business leaders. One of the issues, I don't know if anybody else experiences this, but one of our workforce issues is we don't have enough people that understand how to do the calculations of what the emissions are. So we have ordinances where people don't understand exactly how to calculate their electricity use or their water use. We don't have enough people to know how to do that. So we're investing in accounting students that go out and do that for companies. So there's a lot of different opportunities you can do it in really creative ways. And we're always looking to new ideas and new opportunities. But there's a lot of really cool programs out there that we've learned from and we want to replicate. And we have started to work with some Ohio institutions to do this as well. The organization is Environmental Resilience Institute at IU, is leading this work. And I really do believe that climate education in middle school and high school is important as well. So we've been working on different ways to make sure we do climate camps in the summer and different types of ways where the children can learn to use their voice. This is civic education as well. That's so important. Just because we teach them this, there's so much climate anxiety. And these kids don't know what to do, so we have to find ways to empower them to know that they can go and be brave and go and talk to their mayor, talk to their city councilor, and talk to their state legislator, and we're seeing it happen in action, and it's really working.
It's exciting. And in this section, if we could come up, microphone here. Why don't we have a question from each of yes, thank you.
Hi, thank you for speaking today. I work for a clean transportation nonprofit, so I'm going to piggyback off of her question. One of the issues, and Ryan, you pointed it out about the city of Chicago having huge air quality issues. Until we decarbonize all modes of transportation, you said there's no coal-fired plants in the city of Chicago. How are we going, I mean, what is the plan to decarbonize transportation if we don't invest in medium and heavy duty market acceleration? Because medium and heavy duty vehicles, while they, light duty vehicles have the greatest amount of greenhouse gas emissions, but by and large, medium and heavy duty vehicles constitute a greater proportion of that pollution, especially when we talk around ports and the communities who live around the ports. So we have a really difficult time getting funders. We have a bedrock of the reliable funders that fund transportation, but getting new funders to understand that we need funding for policy in states like Indiana, in states like Ohio, in states like Kentucky, to work with legislators to come up with plans to support market acceleration and fund these things. So I would like to hear what your thoughts are on that.
And actually just leave the microphone with your seatmate there. Thank you. Thank you, Betsy. Who would like to take this?
I can do it. It's funny because a couple of things that I had written down. One to you, it's like, yes, transportation is winning now, but by a point. So it's power sector still has a long way to go. Not that we shouldn't pay attention to transportation. And then the other thing that I had written down was we still don't have a heavy duty standard in the state of Illinois, right? A place that has incredible standards to other effects. Been trying, yeah. It's hard. Transportation is like the little cousin of climate philanthropy, right? Like we know this, and that it is deeply underfunded. I think that there's some things that can still be done to weave it into other places. I think, for example, around like what CBAs, what community-based agreements could look like if you're going to put in a new transportation hub, right? Which we're now seeing with great success for manufacturing plants. So I think that there's some like little tweaks like that where we can tie it into some of the workforce conversation that has been more successful with the other sectors that might bring in some of those funders as well. But it's challenging.
Yeah, and I'd just add, you can see transportation as an environmental justice issue or as a climate justice issue. Ideally, you'd see it as both, but unfortunately, it tends to live in one area or the other. Actually, it's the environmental justice groups in Chicago and Illinois that are leading on this, not the climate groups, because of the impact of diesel pollution. During COVID, the number of logistics hubs for trucking facilities in Chicago just exploded, and they're on the same corridors as schools and everything. They just jam these massive warehouses right next door to some of the densest populations in the city, and of course they're always BIPOC communities, and they can't get funding for their work, but they're pushing ahead anyways. There was a heavy-duty truck rule that was introduced into the legislature in Illinois. We haven't been able to win that yet. We are very close to winning in the city of Chicago an ordinance that would essentially force the city to include a deliberation about the impact, the public health impacts of these centers when deciding where to put them. A cumulative impacts ordinance, which would help. But this is one of the problems. This is a ancillary problem from the fact that climate and public health are always divorced. Governor Pritzker last night said more about public health than I've ever heard any climate funder talk about public health, right? If it doesn't reduce GHG emissions, we don't care. And in fact, many times, the climate solutions that we're advocating for actually make public health worse, and we never want to talk about that. So you want to talk about messaging, let's talk about the fact that many of the things we advocate for, if your child lives next to a gas pad, just means more leukemia. And so I think that until we break down that barrier, it's going to be harder for funders to fully embrace some of these other issues like transportation. So I wholeheartedly agree, but it is, and we have the data to show transportation continues to be the least funded area of climate, and I think this is one of the reasons why.
One last quick question, and then we're going to have our panelists wrap up. So.
Thank
Please.
you so much. This has been a great discussion. Sandra Henry for Slipstream. We focus on electrifying and decarbonizing buildings of all kinds. Ryan, you mentioned earlier that the funding in climate and EJ areas is dissipating. Could you dig a little deeper and explain what's going on in that landscape?
Yeah, I can offer my theories and would invite others to do the same. So I have two theories. One is the IRA unleashed a $1 trillion wealth race. You know, the idea of a green economy was no longer a theory, it was real. And the number one thing that we heard climate funders say was, okay, the EJ groups, we needed them when we needed rabble-rousing in Congress, we needed people to sit in offices and protest, but they don't build things, right? And so I think that was a big part of it, was now the race was on. You know, we talk about the hundreds of millions or even billions in grant making out of the IRA. Those were peanuts compared to the trillions of dollars of tax credits. And so much philanthropy exited this space to move into things to take advantage, you know, to position themselves to capitalize on this market transfer, this massive wealth transfer. Also, EJ groups, community groups wanted a piece of that pie. And a lot of folks were uncomfortable with that, right? The idea that, you know, we talk about community solar and how that's been unleashed by these laws. Who should own that community solar? The community or big national developers? A lot of people, including within climate philanthropy, erred on the side of big national developers. And so there was a lot of wedges between those who were essential to winning the IRA and those who wanted to capitalize it. The second thing I would say is the fundamental problem with climate philanthropy is every day, every 0.1 degree of warming makes our options tighter and tighter. And so we're starting to see money exit communities, exit the ground, and move to moonshots. Right? And I worry that trend is only going to get worse. as the climate math gets worse. I don't know of any other issue that philanthropy works on where every day the hourglass goes down and your options get more and more radical.
I'm just going to jump in really quick. I mean, this is why you work with local philanthropy, right? Like, there's no way I would think of doing any of the IRA projects that we got $285 million for without my local environmental justice groups. It's not going to happen. Like, the entire grant application was like, but that is a challenge in philanthropy, is that you have big philanthropy up here and us at the local level who really understand our communities, know the right groups to talk to, how to get that money to them. I mean, that is the value of working with Stephanie and I, because we really, I always joke, like, I don't know much, but I know Ohio. And I do actually take that really seriously, and I can tell you the groups on the ground that got us that money, and I'm making sure that they keep that money in their neighborhoods and their communities because they did all the hard work to get it in the first place.
Well, we could spend hours learning from this wonderful panel and this standing room only audience, but we always end on time, but we have all of 10 seconds. So is there any last quick thought any of you would like to leave, but only if it's an optimistic one?
I'll do it. You've met all these people. There's a lot of us from the Midwest. There are tens of thousands of people every day in the Midwest who focus on climate and solving this problem and are never gonna give up. And that should give all of you hope. You're part of that solution, and we need to just keep moving.